Hello and welcome to this round 4 of GP Turin. Tim Willoughby in the booth with Hall of Famer Frank Karsten, and we have our Hall of Fame-elect Martin User. There's been a lot of talk about what the best deck in Standard is right now. Martin User going with what you referred to as either your level 1 deck or your level 3 deck for this tournament.
Well, level 4 actually.
Sorry, yes.
Because to set the stage, I actually gave Martin my view on the format 1 or 2 days ago, which is basically, well, Remnant Bread was level 1, was just the most powerful deck at the Pro Tour over a month ago. Then at the standard GPs in the last couple of weeks, we've seen people gravitate towards what I call level 2, anti-mono red decks, like Zombies, now Teamer Energy. For this weekend, I expect a lot of level 3 decks, as in Blue-White Approach, Red-Green Ramp, decks that can go over the top of Teamer Energy and like beat the level 2 decks. And Martin Juza, he was probably anticipating that metagame development, and he went to, well, level 4, the decks that beat level 3, which is just going back to level 1 again. The metagame is cyclical in that way. He is hoping to play against all those slow control or ramp decks and beat them with his Remnant Bread deck before they have a chance to set up.
Well, we'll get a chance to see whether or not the matchup against Teamer Energy is as rough as the Teamer Energy players are kind of hoping. He kicked things off with Bomat Courier into Falconwrath Gorger. We've now got an Arncrop Crasher on turn 3, and we see why Longtusk Cub didn't get played by Andreas Gantz on turn 2. He was holding up that mana so he could use his Harness Lightning, killing off a threat. I mean, he's only taking 3 on that attack. Bomat Courier already 3 cards under it, so potentially a great way of Martin User refilling if it doesn't die off on basically this exact turn.
Mm-hmm. Well, Juza is ahead in this game by a bit. It definitely also helps that you're on the play with the deck as aggressive as Remnant Bread. In general, from what I've heard from many players, Teamer Energy has a small advantage in the matchup, but it can definitely be close. And when you're playing against Grand Prix top 8 collector Martin Juza, you can never feel safe.
Rogue Refiner there generating a card and some energy for Andreas Gantz. Both of those elements very useful to his deck. A relatively hefty sized blocker here. It's going to be able to perhaps cause Martin User to pump the brakes a little bit if he can't find a way of making that creature unable to block this turn.
Well, this is another very good turn for Martin Juza. He has all the things he needs. Fast creatures, removal spells whenever Gantz plays a blocker. And now that Bomat Courier, 4 cards hiding in the mailbag, potentially 5 on the next turn. Andreas Gantz better deal with it at some point, otherwise all those cards are gonna spell game over for him. Well,
Premium removal spell Harness Lightning pointed at the little Bomat Courier. Those cards stay in exile face down, so no information for either player. It's 2 Falconwrath Gorgers up against 1 Longtusk Cub. Incendiary Flow already played by Martin User. He's got Kari Zev there, so he's continually deploying threats. Andreas Gantz, though, he's going into his turn 5 at 12 life. Do you think he's going to be happy with that sort of development?
Yes, the previous turn was just perfect for him. Exactly what he needed. The removal spell for the Bomat Courier, along with a Longtusk Cub that could potentially become a 5/5, which is just a humongous blocker for all those small red creatures. Yeah, basically, both players had good draws in this game, but I have to give the edge to Andreas Gantz now, because he can surely add another big monster to the board on this turn. Then another one on the next turn. He has a hand filled with big creatures. And 12 is still a relatively safe life total. It's not super safe though, in case Martin would draw, say, an Arncrop Crasher on the next turn. But I do think that Andreas has a small advantage here.
So an Exerted Glorybringer taking down Kari Zev, meaning just 2 Falconwrath Gorgers left over for Martin User here. And it's not at all unusual to see these Teamer Energy decks basically using Glorybringer as a removal spell with a bit extra, unless it's simply going to win the game immediately.
Another relevant factor is that Gantz now has 8 energy, so he can turn his Longtusk Cub into a 6/6. That would be big enough to block a Hazoret and live, so that takes out another potential angle of attack from Juza. The window is closing soon for the Czech player.
And it works out as well that the red deck doesn't have, at least in the main deck, too many ways of dealing with flyers. Might be a tricky one for Martin User to be able to hold off Glorybringer if it decides that it wants to become a more straightforward 4/4 flying dragon that's not eating his creatures.
So it looks like Martin has a Mountain and an Earthshaker Kenra in hand. He could play the Kenra. In that case, Gans will just pump his Lungtusk up out of range of the triggered ability, and then still attack with everything. That would put Gans to 8 life. Martin would lose a Falconrod Garger in the process, but then Martin is also out of cards, and he probably won't be able to assemble 8 points of burn before Gans will overwhelm his board. So as I don't really see many ways out of this for Martin Juza. At least looking at Andreas's hand, so many big creatures here.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one. Martin User has not seen any Ramanap Ruins or Sunscorched Deserts that sometimes do provide just that little bit of extra push, a bit of extra reach for the red deck. As things stand, he's basically got 2 creatures that are wildly outclassed by what Andreas Gans has going on. And in terms of cards in hand, we know that at least one of them is a relatively unimpressive haste creature on this board.
Yeah, if you want to be beating Ramanap Red, you need to be doing a couple of things, just in terms of deck composition. First of all, you need some good removal spells to deal with the early creatures and potentially Ankrop Crasher. Second of all, you need good blockers, high toughness blockers. And Timor Energy has, all of those. Ruler Virtuoso in particular is a perfect stabilizer. And you also need a bit of a clock in your deck, because you cannot give the the Ramanap Red deck infinite time to draw their burn spells for the last couple points of damage. So because Timor Energy has all of those factors, and it can deal with Hazoret by blocking with a 6/6 or with some Topter tokens, it is why many people feel it has a small edge in a matchup.
Well, a big play here for Andreas Gans. Woodland Wanderer, thanks to those Ether Hubs, coming in as a gigantic 6/6 with Vigilance. At 6/6, it's just going to be a really big problem for Martin User to deal with. Even if he has a burn spell, it's tough for him to end up in a position where he's not at least 2-for-1ing himself in order to deal with the big threat. And at 11 life with 3 copies of Falconwrath Gorger, he's really not got a whole lot going on here. A shock will take down one of those vampires, and Martin User may be already thinking about what he's going to do in game 2 here, because game 1 looks like it could be lights out.
Yep. Yeah, at this point there's just no way you can trade against all of the creatures of Gans. The only hope that Martin has is that Andreas makes some incorrect attacks or blocks, and then Martin might be able to sneak in for enough damage, but I really don't see that happening, not from this board state.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the only incorrect attacks here from Andreas Gans would potentially just be not attacking at all for a number of turns and somehow Martin User pulling it around, but that's not going to happen here. So the Exerted Glorybringer killing off one of the potential blockers and the other one having to jump under the bus. Andreas Gans here just sort of going through the motions, finishing things off, and Martin User picks up his cards. Game 1 at a close, quick and ultimately painful for the red deck.
Now the interesting inclusion from Andreas there is Woodland Wanderer. It's a card that not all Timor decks play, and I do kind of like it here. The Timor deck has access to 4 colors of mana, so it's not difficult to turn it into a 6/6. And 6/6, vigilance, trample, all kinds of relevant abilities. Let's just put the card on the screen.
It's one of those ones that I saw it see play a little bit at the Pro Tour, and there one of the key justifications that people were using is that 6 toughness is a very convenient number if you're expecting people to be playing the likes of Hour of Devastation. Hour of Devastation, a great way of making sure that you can deal with most boards in most situations However, 6 toughness enough to mean that you can survive even a big removal spell. As it turns out, our Devastation maybe not seeing quite as much play as perhaps people were expecting after the Pro Tour, but Woodland Wanderer also just on a board where you're expecting comparatively small toughness creatures that might be trying to block to stay in a race. The trample, huge. And how do you race something that's that big with vigilance?
Yep. Yeah, and I'm looking at Andreas' deck list here. He's playing 4 copies. He went down to 2 copies of Bristling Hydra. Makes sense for curve reasons. And doesn't have as many 5-drops as some other decks might have. Only 4 copies of Glorybringer. So yeah, he went pretty much all in on the Woodland Wanderers. But they can easily be the biggest creature on the battlefield. Not easy to kill with red burn spells. I think they're gonna be good in the mirror match.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
Both on attack, on defense, thanks to vigilance. They trample over the Whirler Virtuoso tokens. It seems like a solid inclusion. Obviously poor against spells like, let's say, Murder, because you just trade like a 4 mana card for a 3 mana card, or stuff like Never to Return. But those types of removal spells are not seeing all that much play at the moment. So, given that Woodland Wanderer seems powerful against both other Teamer Energy decks, but also against Remnant Bread and other creature decks, I like the inclusion.
Now, a question for you, Frank. Obviously, in order to get the full converge to make your Woodland Wanderer into a 6/6, you're needing to pay 4 different colours of mana.
Yes.
It doesn't require you to have 4 if you cast it with less colours of mana. It simply comes in with less +1/+1 counters. The fact that Andreas Gant's Teamer Energy deck clearly can make 4 colours of mana relatively easily, is it also doing what a lot of the other Teamer Energy decks are doing, which is splashing black for the likes of the Scarab God?
Well, yes and no. Andreas does have 1 swamp in his deck, but unless I missed something, he has no black cards. So the swamp is just in there to, search with Attune with Either, so that you can make a maximum size Woodland Wanderer, and also to put the idea of the Scarab God into the opponent's head. But yeah, he doesn't have any of those gods.
That's kind of interesting. I mean, I wonder whether or not the idea of the Scarab God is actually more potent than having the Scarab God itself. I know that a lot of people have spoken about that one as being one of the more important cards in the Teamer Energy mirror. But I guess that if you can force your opponent to play around it, then you've already let it do some of its work without having to have it in your 75.
Yep.
Martin User's list, it's a little bit different from some of the ones that we saw at the Pro Tour. He's got main deck Pia Nalars, presumably a little bit of a nod towards the fact that red decks are still good, and Pia Nalar we know to be a potent force in the mirror match. Hazaret the Fervent being a 4 of, I think everyone realizes now quite how powerful Hazaret can be. After sideboarding, he gets to do some of the things that Paulo Vitor Damaderosa was doing to win the Pro Tour. He gets to get the value of Sand Stranglers. He gets to work with an Ethersphere Harvester. He's got Glory Bringers, so we may see him try and go big after sideboarding, but he does still have the option of trying to be low to the ground and aggressive, and kicking things off with a Falconwrath Gorger. That could be exactly the plan that he's chosen here.
Yep. Actually, Morton's deck only has 8 1-drops, which is not a lot. I told him to play more, but I think he ignored me. But so far he has had 1 on turn 1 in all the games.
The maths checks out. It all works out. Karizev coming down on turn 2 for Martin User. He's going to have to win 2 on the bounce if he's going to take this match away from Andreas Gantz. Andreas merrily playing game trails and revealing that same forest each and every time. Picks up a Glorybringer on turn 3 here, User, and there's Ramanap Ruins. Here's Ancrop Crasher. If Andreas Gantz has got removal, he's now got a few different choices as to where to point it.
Yeah, so far this is close to the dream curve for any Ramanap Red deck. Maybe 2 1-drops on turn 2 could have been better, but doesn't matter too much. My first idea would be that Ancrop Crasher is the bigger threat, because, well, typically when you're in doubt, just kill the 3 mana card rather than the 2 mana card. It's probably better, because, well, it costs more mana. But Gans is happy to just deal with the Karizev. I guess when your next creature is a 2/2, it might make sense, because the Servant of the Conduit wouldn't be able to profitably block either Karizev due to Menace or the Monkey token. Whereas if Morten wants to attack through the Servant of the Conduit with his Aankrop Crasher, he has to exert every other turn. So that means that he can only attack for 3, or for 3 every other turn.
A virtual 1.5, sort of.
Yeah.
As things stand, Andreas Gans may well want to keep that Servant of the Conduit around. He's still not got any blue mana available from his lands. I can see there's already a Rogue Refiner in hand for him, so he may want to, at least for the meantime, even if that Aankrop Crasher wasn't exerted, hold back on it. Hazoret the Fervent coming along, 2 cards in hand for Martin User, so can't attack with it yet, but I think there's every reason to assume that he will be able to once he gets up to his next turn. 4 mana available next turn, 2 cards in hand, a very low curve typically for these Ramunap red decks.
Yeah, it has to be a very strange combination of cards on the next turn for Morten to not be able to attack.
Yeah,
it has to be like 3 copies of Hazoret or something crazy like that.
A couple of Glory Bringers.
Yeah.
So Aethersphere Harvester in hand here for Andreas Gans. That another way that the red deck can struggle to get through all the damage that it would like to. Plenty of energy available to this energy deck in order to give the Harvester lifelink.
Yeah, so now Gans has to figure out a game plan to deal with Hazoret. He is he's behind on board, behind in the damage race. So he can either, let's say, try to find a 6 toughness creature, like a huge Longtusk Cub or a Woodland Wanderer, to be able to block Hazoret continually, or go for, let's say, a damage race involving a bunch of chump blocks. Well, this...
It's a 5/5 Woodland Wanderer.
Yeah,
because of the land base available to Andreas Gans this turn, this game, he's not been able to put the full number of counters on that Woodland Wanderer. And 5/5, the difference is pretty important in this game.
Yes.
Hazoret the Fervent can't currently attack, but you know what? An untapped land means that Glorybringer can get cast here, and this could shape up to be kind of a nice turn for Martin User.
That could be pretty powerful. I think Andreas is going for the correct game plan of just trying to go for a damage race, because the Woodland Wanderer, even though it wouldn't be able to block, it can surely attack. But I think Morten's board is gonna be too powerful, at least for this game.
Yeah, so exertions there. In this instance, taking Andreas Gans off one of his colours of mana, killing off that Servant of the Conduit. And Gans here with some relatively unexciting blocking options.
Yeah. I mean, Gans also has Aethersphere Harvester in hand, which is an excellent card in this matchup. High toughness, lifelink. But Gans doesn't have the best pilots around. And just doesn't really have the time to deploy all the cards from his hand.
I mean, he's got 2 copies of Rogue Refiner that he can't cast right now, so it's Aethersphere Harvester and a Servant of Conduit in the hand as his options. Gets a Vigilant Swing in, no harm in that, but it's a matter of what he's going to do with follow-up here, because he's on 4 life and he's facing down so many different damage sources here. Hazoret can start throwing cards from Martin User's hand at Andreas Gans for 2 points of damage. There's a lot of deserts in play that represent more damage. He really needs to get his life total up, and that's the reason that we're seeing Aethersphere Harvester come down here for a desperation shot at just a little bit more life.
So now Martin is thinking, what could go wrong here? If Andreas has nothing, then Martin can just attack with both of his creatures, perhaps even exert the Aankrop Crasher. Then Aethersphere Harvester has to chump block Hazoret and gain lifelink, so that would keep Andreas at 4. Well, at least it would keep Andreas alive for another turn.
And if either of these creatures gets through, then Hazoret's ability is enough to... Oh, sorry, Andreas can drop to 1 if he takes Aankrop Crasher and then takes a hit from Hazoret's ability.
Yeah, although Martin doesn't even have to exert the Aankrop Crasher. I don't think there's a real point in doing that, because Gans just needs the life gain from Ethosphere Harvester to survive the attack.
Well, a braid certainly makes this set of decisions a touch
works.
easier. We're going to a game 3, boys. Martin User picking up the win in game 2. He had a pretty ideal start, and then, as it turns out, a small stumble from the energy deck was enough to allow User to capitalize. And this is what various red decks have been doing basically for most of the history of the game. They have such an aggressive start that it means that if there's ever a stumble, if there's ever any kind of missed opportunity to make a play, the red decks can punish that more than almost any other deck you're likely to find in any format that they're good in.
Yep, that's what red decks have been doing for the past 20, 25 years. Nothing has really changed about that. But this Remnant Bread deck, the current iteration, so to say, is surely one of the best decks in Standard, and would still be my pick for the deck to win this tournament. I do think that being, let's say, one level ahead of the people who try to be one level ahead, so picking a deck that beats the anti-teamer decks, that's the way where you want to be this weekend. And Martin Juza has the same philosophy in his deck choice. Looking at Martin's deck list, one interesting inclusion in his sideboard is worth pointing out. Not so much for this matchup, but just for the field as a whole. 2 copies of Warping Whale, which he can cast thanks to all of his deserts. It's pretty solid against the approach of the Second Sun decks. You can counter any sorcery, which means that you can counter, well, first of all, the approach of the Second Sun, but also potentially Fumigate if they would still have that. A solid inclusion for a metagame where we've seen a lot of approach of the Second Sun so far.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how that's kind of shaped up. I mean, it strikes me as kind of wild that the red deck would be having to think about counterspells for the 7 mana sorcery, but
that's like Redfish.
Yeah. Every now and again, we find ourselves in these strange, brave new worlds. Of course, Warping Whale won't be a feature in the format for a great deal longer when we have our set rotation with the introduction of Ixalan. Warping Whale will go away, while as the Second Sun, it will still be approaching.
Oh, yeah. Now, speaking of Martin Juza, he is one of the competitors in the World Championship, which is going to be held in a little over a month, October 5 through 8 in Boston. So that's the week after the Ixalan release, where the best players in the world are going to show us how to draft and play Standard in this new format. I'm really looking forward to that event.
It's going to be super fun. I can tell you right now that even the coverage team is working on its big testing plan for between GP Providence, which is the release of Ixalan,
right,
and the World Championship. We're going to be doing a whole lot of drafting that week. It's going to be very sweet indeed. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how players, be they pros or be they just picking up the game, approach dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Like, I think that I'm probably slightly more excited about dinosaurs than pirates, but I would begrudge no one being excited about either, because they're both pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I saw a post on Reddit where, and now I'm paraphrasing from memory. Someone said that in the new Standard, you might see dinosaurs piloting helicopters and skyships, fighting against Egyptian zombie pirates. That's just crazy.
Crazy's the word. I'm very much looking forward to seeing how all that pans out. Not too long on that, and of course do go to magicthegathering.com in the next week or two, because that will be your sort of hub of all of the previews of cards from Ixalan. Not long to go until that one, and of course find a local store to you to go and play in a pre-release.
Mm-hmm. The pre-releases are, I think, September 23, 24.
That sounds about right.
Yep.
And more or less, I think, to me, pre-releases and the World Magic Cup are my favourite events of the year. They're just super fun events where everyone is having a blast. Obviously, pre-releases are a little bit easier to qualify for. Nationals going on in September, so that we can figure out who's going to be representing various countries in the World Magic Cup.
Yep, but pre-releases are great events. They tend to be casual players who may not have played the game in quite a while. Also tend to come out and play again, because the playing field is in a way level. It's the first time everyone is playing with the cards, and it's just always a fun environment at the local game store.
Alrighty, so players drawing their opening hands here. Looks like Andreas Gantz has a reasonable mix of land and spells. He's got an early Magra Spray for one of the first threats to come from Martin User. Hopefully both these players get a chance to keep on 7. I would love for this one to be concluded based on good plays on both sides rather than possibly a little bit of bad luck from someone.
Well,
it is all part of the game though, so we shall see.
At least this matchup is generally a good one. Many of the matchups in Standard are just good old clean Magic with some combat math, some creature removal, some proper sequencing of your cards. So I've been enjoying the way many of the games in the current Standard play out. Lots of good decisions and fun interactive games.
Well, Martin User, you said that he needed more 1-drops. He did not find a 1-drop for turn 1 in this third game.
I told him before the start of the tournament, 8 is not enough, man.
Tisk, tisk. I mean, I guess he's got some shocks, but you don't want to be firing one of them off at the head on turn 1.
No, well, it would have been perfect if Andreas had a Servant of the Conduit, but that's not happening.
So here's Karizev.
That's out of range of Magma Spray, but Andreas Gans does have Harness Lightning.
And fires that one off. Has to use all the 3 energy it generates, so just a straightforward 1-for-1. Passing without playing lands. This is not where Gantz wants to be. He's got some burn spells, and he will have some targets for them soon enough. Pia Nalar coming along here, but Pia Nalar representing a 2-for-1 in Martin User's favour here if Andreas Gantz is simply firing off burn spells to deal with these threats.
I was just saying how many of the games in Standard are very close and fun and interactive, but unfortunately sometimes you don't find the perfect lands. Well, there's one. There's land number 3 for Andreas Gans, so we have a proper game on our hands.
Yeah, we talked in the last game about how the red deck punishes decks that stumble. We will find out in the next 2 or 3 turns how well Martin User can punish the relatively small stumble that came from Andreas Gantz, just missing the 1 land drop. Here comes Bomat Courier. That attempting one to kill off sometime fairly soon. Umcot Crasher, though, an even bigger threat. What are we going to see Andreas Gantz do in the face of a sudden 5 power that can come in and attack him? Magma Stray on the Umcot Crasher makes a lot of sense. Going to get a hit in for 2 here, though.
And now I think Andreas has 2 Bristling Hydra, 2 Woodland Wanderer in hand. He draws the land. That's exactly what he was hoping for. That's
basically the best land to see as well, right?
Such a relief for Andreas Gans, I must imagine. Because if he had not drawn a land here, maybe another big creature, he would have had to pass the turn without a play. Would have been pretty far behind. Now with that land, he can affect the board in a huge way. Plus he also knows that, he has his plays for the next couple turns locked up. More big monsters coming in.
Though it must be noted that the Woodland Wanderer currently in his hand, with no more energy to work with, he'd only be able to give it 2 +1/+1 counters. It would be only a 4/4 for 4.
Well, if he plays a Bristling Hydra first, then he can cycle that mana through the Ether Hubs again to get a 6/6, another 6/6 Woodland Wanderer. But at least not on the next turn. Yeah.
And look at Martin User's creatures in the face of this Woodland Wanderer. It gets to block them very handily indeed. It gets to attack with vigilance and trample.
But we have a good old-fashioned race of flyers in the air versus big green monsters.
Glorybringer using its alternate ability of simply flying in and attacking. Yep. No exertion needed.
Yeah, so Juzan now has, technically a 3-turn clock, but it's quite likely he can assemble 1 final point of damage from somewhere. And Gans now doesn't have an answer to the flyers, and I'm not sure he can get there with a damage race. So he can either make a Bristling Hydra, or maybe a 5/5 Woodland Wanderer. The benefit of playing a Woodland Wanderer here is that you have assuming that you attack with all your creatures on the next turn, you have an additional blocker for the turn after. which could matter, but he just goes for the Bristling Hydra.
Well, there's an Arncroc Crasher in hand, so let's see what Martin User chooses to deploy this turn. There's a deck bristling with threats and a Bristling Hydra, just hoping he's going to be enough.
So Arncroc Crasher, if Martin makes that, he could exert it on the Woodland Wanderer, attack with everything, and that would put guns down to 5 life, which does mean that the 2 flyers would become lethal. But does Martin still have...
I think he has an Arncroc Crasher and an Incendiary Flow.
Okay. Well, then I don't think you need to be attacking with the Arncroc Crasher at this point. Might as well just attack with the flyers. But Martin is also... Okay. I was gonna say he's not in danger of dying to the swing back. Currently Andreas has 10 power on the board, potentially 11 with the Bristling Hydra activation, and Martin is still at 14. So that is not gonna be lethal, although Martin may have to worry about Glorybringer on the next turn as well. Maybe going through his mind.
Yeah, he's just figuring out the level to which he wants to exert his creatures here. Looks like they're both getting exerted. What are our targets?
Okay, so Arncroc Crasher is going to make the Woodland Wanderer unable to block. I'm not sure what the exertion of Glorybringer on Bristling Hydra is going to do.
I guess that he's saying, I'm going to put you down to 1 energy. And set things up so that
he
has an abrade.
Okay, that definitely works. Okay. So basically, the Glorybringer targets the Bristling Hydra. Andreas Gans gives it hexproof in response, and in response to that, there's an abrade to take out the Bristling Hydra. So that suddenly makes a whole lot of sense, the way Martin Juza played. And now I don't see a good way out for Andreas.
Yeah, Andreas Gans suddenly just faced down with a huge amount of different threats. Once again, kind of a bit like we saw in Game 2, but just think of the difference if he had had a land on turn 3 as opposed to missing that land drop. He actually really wasn't that far behind being able to make everything happen in this game.
Yep. Now I assume that Martin still has Lethal Burn in hand. Otherwise he might find himself in trouble.
A couple of 6/6s, but there's Incendiary Flow and the Handshake. Martin User had a little bit of a scare there in Game 1, but was able to pull things back in Games 2 and indeed 3 with his Ramonap red deck. He advances to 4-0. Gets out of his first round after the bye is absolutely fine. We will get a chance to show you a little bit more Magic soon enough, but first, these messages.